Welcome to the Westside Barbell podcast. In today's episode, we're going to be breaking down the dynamic effort method. And with me today is my co-host, Burley Hawk. Burley, thanks for being on today.
Good to be here.
The dynamic effort method is that one method that drives everyone crazy. As soon as you start bringing in percentages and 3 weeks waves, it is the most confusing out of them all. Max effort seems to be a lot more clear cut, but I'm not sure what are your thoughts on the questions you got on dynamic effort.
Most of the time, it's folks that just are confused on velocity parameters or confused on how to appropriately, control intensity over the course of 3 week wave. And as you know, most of the time when somebody fails with dynamic effort, it's because they're training too heavy.
If we were going to start off with like the purpose of dynamic effort training, what would you say it is?
Well, the primary purpose is to focus on the improvement of the rate of force development, and we do that by training submaximal weights and lifting at maximal velocity. And then we're generally trying to carry an average of 0.8 meters per second for any rep we do, whether that's a lower or upper bench press, squat, deadlift.
Yeah, and to try hammering that home, it's lifting the lighter weights as fast as possible. We're not trying to lift the heaviest load. We're training our athletes to produce maximum force quickly.
Yep.
What are the parameters of velocity?
Well, every set, like I said, every rep needs to meet we're ideally hoping to carry a 0.8 meters per second average. Some might be a little slower, some might be a little faster, but the 0.8 meters per second average is what we're looking for. And that's every week, whether it's a 12x2 or an 8x2 or a 5x5, the velocity parameters stay the same.
And would you recommend using tendo units all the time?
Yeah, well, yeah, certainly, yeah. We've discussed, nowadays they're readily available. In the past they were available, but they were just very expensive. Now it's not so cost prohibitive. So, yeah, certainly, if you're able to, I would, as long as it's a device that's connected to the barbell. I know there's apps out there, phone apps that use cameras to do so. I don't know if I would trust that as much, but yeah, if you have a device that's connected to the barbell, it's probably getting decent feedback, or at least feedback you can rely upon.
Because we measure bar speed visually and by feel. We're doing it for a minute, but it is good to get a calibration by bringing in a tendo unit every now and again. I'm with you. The quarter ones are the most accurate, but there's ones that are app-based. They are pretty damn good, but as coaches, it is good to calibrate every once in a while. Just don't get locked in to using the tendo unit for everything, because you'll slow down the routine, you'll slow down groups, you'll start driving yourself nuts and your athletes nuts.
Yeah.
So,
and if you're a coach that's new to this stuff, right, the tendo unit can kind of give you a frame of reference to learn how to eyeball barbell velocity.
Then we kind of touched on it, but the rate of force development. Why is this so crucial?
Yeah, so, our primary training methods are max and dynamic effort. So max effort develops absolute strength, which is the peak force that an athlete can produce. When we're focused on rate of force development training, we're focused on trying to improve or increase or decrease the amount of time it takes an athlete to reach that peak force output. So they kind of play one into the other. One's focused on intensity, maximal effort, highest intensity we can train that day. And then the dynamic effort is, a repeated effort, set and rep parameter setting with the parameters of velocity included.
And from coaching athletes, a lot of grapplers, like rate of force development translates directly to enhanced performance.
Yep.
Like the dynamic effort is specifically designed to boost rate of force development. So if you're an athlete, it is a must. Same it is for if you were a lifter.
Yeah, it's explosive power development, right?
For sure. Then the 3 week wave format, and I think this is the one that kind of people start getting lost on when we go 50, 55, and 60. Yep. But can you give an overview on it and why we do it?
Yeah, so we follow the 3 week wave format. It's we decrease volume while increasing intensity over the course of 3 weeks, and that's used as a means of driving a certain amount of volume and intensity each week, and control fatigue over the course of 3 weeks. And then once the 3 weeks is up, we go back to the 12x2 and the lower, or the 5x5 with the lower percentage. We walk through the wave again, and that's just a way to control fatigue over the course of a training month, training year.
We have, we can share the screen. But this kind of gives a visual representation for everyone who is watching this of the 3-week wave. Can you kind of talk through this a little bit, Burley?
Yeah, so we get a lot of questions on how we structure a 3-week wave and how the percentages are broken up between bar weight and common resistance. So here you see we got the 12x2 or the 5x5 waves included for the squat. We typically don't do a 5x5 wave with the deadlift or the bench press. If we were going to do a 5x5 wave with the bench press, we would just do a compensatory acceleration wave, with just bar weight only. But anyways, as you'll see the breakdown in bar weight and common resistance. The common resistance is going to stay the same throughout all 3 weeks at 25%. The bar weight's what increases over time. You'll notice on the 5x5, we decrease the training percentage by 5%, and that's to allow athletes to maintain velocity over the course of a 5x5 workout. Obviously, when you're doing a 5x5, there's going to be more intra and interset fatigue accrued. So, lightening the training weight slightly is going to hopefully keep athletes able to reach their velocity marks.
That's a huge point. When we started doing 5x5s with the fighters and grapplers, we realized as soon as we got to week 2 at 55%, rep 3, 4, 5, and 6 were not as quality as we need in terms of velocity. So by just dropping the bar weight down 5%, keeping it with the same accommodating resistance, it was a game changer for them to get correct technique throughout the lift and to generate the required force on it.
Yeah, and with a 5x5, especially if you're using bands as an athlete, if you're training too heavy, athletes get fatigued. You'll start to see some, really poor technique exhibited as athletes get tired towards the 4th or 5th set.
And having stuff based off objective percentages is huge. It removes a lot of the guesswork. And this kind of gets into, we get a lot of questions on RPE and rate of perceived exertion. And there's times where it's somewhat advantageous, and then times when it's just subjectively or objectively incorrect to use. Where we kind of use RPE is when we're talking to the athletes before the workout. How are we doing? How are you feeling? And if they're going to give us an RPE of 8, okay, at least we know they're feeling something's happening, but we're not changing the objective data. We know we're not changing the objective of 50, 55, 60% bar weight plus 25% accommodating resistance. Whereas if you're going to use RPE to where I am feeling awful and you're reducing weight based off that, well, then you've never really trained through adversity. You have to be able to train through these, because if you're an athlete, you can't just say, hey, my RPE is not good today, I'm not going to do this. Yeah. Or going to tailor it down. You have to perform at your best.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to add on to percentage training, like superiority to RPE?
Yeah, the reason I prefer percentage training is because it creates an objective mark for an athlete to meet. And then, if an athlete can't meet that mark, say, for instance, if an athlete's struggling at 75%, the 50% with 25% accommodating resistance, to maintain velocity over the course of, the workout, or over the course of a wave, we, study see the issues with bar velocity. Then you can start to look for issues in the training that's causing that. So we're always looking for correspondence between, absolute strength, the level of absolute strength, and then the ability for an athlete to move a particular bar weight at a particular velocity. So that's why I think that percentage is important, because it gives an objective mark to meet. And then, with RPE, it's always relying on the credibility or the experience of the individual. You have some athletes that might perceive what is actually an RPE 5 as an RPE 9. And then you might have some athletes that, what is actually an RPE 8, they'll register at a 6. So depending on who you're working with, the reliability of an RPE report can vary.
And for those of you who are looking at this graph, before the question comes up, the sets that we've got 12 sets of 2, 10 sets of 2, 8 sets of 2, these are stuff that we manipulate based on 3-week waves. So we might have a descending set and rep scheme like this, but for some of our athletes, we may just keep a standard 12 across the board, depending on how much density and volume we want to put in the workout. These are aspects of the dynamic effort method that you can tailor to your needs of what you need to get done. It's just like when I was watching when you guys were training from powerlifting. You guys are lifting so much load. The weight is a whole lot, and the speed tapering down makes a lot of sense in terms of the reps.
Yeah.
Or the sets, should I say.
Yeah.
But then sometimes you'll do an 8x2 in week 3 and then start working up at the end. There's so much ways that you can manipulate dynamic effort, which again, I can understand where that causes confusion, but just know that sets and reps, everything here is guidelines, but you're able to manipulate them to get the required density and volume you want from your workout.
Yeah, definitely. We always recommend that beginners, will follow the standard recommendations, but as as your knowledge increases in relation to the conjugate method, as you get more experience coaching, this becomes a strength conditioning operating system that can be manipulated in a variety of ways.
Okay. So if we get into executing dynamic effort, what is the importance of execution and competency within the exercise?
Well, execution is so important because we're moving at, maximal velocity. So for that to be possible and to be safe, we have to make sure that athletes are technically competent and then also able to exhibit proper technique, both, at the beginning, the middle, and the end of an exercise. You don't want an athlete that on set 10 to 12, they're totally losing their technique, and then, the dynamic effort work becomes dangerous. So something I would recommend for beginners that might not be used to counter resistance, it can oftentimes be benefit to start with compensatory acceleration to just learn how to move, underneath bar weight in a higher velocity setting. A lot of people that are new to training are just, they're tempo squatting, or they're just, trying to find their squat. So before you move on to higher velocity movements with a counter resistance involved, it might be best to go with a compensatory acceleration approach.
I think a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions of Westside in terms of it's all like a lot of people think it's just lifting the heaviest amount of weight and that's it. But it was never just about how much weight you lift. It's how effectively you lifted that weight too.
Yep.
The two of them go hand in hand.
Yep.
So mastering form, developing that competency and technique, and ensuring that you have the right patterns of firing. Because sometimes you're doing a box squat and you don't know how to come off the box. You'll start incorrectly. You'll round over into a good morning. Yep. All these things we do, and we try to hone in on proper technical execution of it. Obviously, paying attention to the velocities. Yep. But all this is done to minimize risk and then maximize your strength gains.
Well, and as you know, like Louis used to say about the dynamic effort training structure, it offers a lot of first rep opportunities, gives you a lot of chances to get that first rep perfect. And then, another thing that we want to focus on with dynamic effort is, like I said, it's, you got 12 by 2, that's 24 opportunities to really focus on technique under, training percentages that are somewhat relevant to what we'll see in competition. A lot of people want to work technique under, a broomstick or very lightweight. Dynamic effort is just the right amount of intensity to where you can, consciously make changes to your technique and not take the risk of having to do so when you're, approaching a max effort single. And as you know, Louis was a huge stickler for technique. I think a lot of people think that we just, get under a barbell and, give it hell, and that's not the case. People will criticize some of our exercise variations like forward pulling bands. Well, the reason forward pulling bands became a thing is because Louis was trying to correct people's ability to, create a correct brace and upper back stability when they're lifting the squat bar out of the rack. So, the dynamic effort's not only an opportunity to increase your rate of force development, it's also an opportunity to really dial your technique in.
It's one of the most important days from a coach.
Yeah.
Like to be able to get a lot of feedback from the athletes. Yep. And back to the forward pulling bands, that was came from Jerry McNamara when he came over. He was doing it on the squat and the deadlifts, and then Louis started implementing that with to help with technique. And two, if you ever came and visited when Louis was coaching with you guys as lifters, he'd also coach the lifter to who they were. He understood what proper technique was, but sometimes there was people weren't able to execute it. Like he knew what their form was and within limits how to coach them.
Yeah.
So there's a big difference between coaching a Laura or coaching someone who doesn't have the hip flexibility or can get into the positions. So he knew that, and then he would vary on the spot what coaching aspects that athlete needed.
Yeah, and when we're talking technique, everybody's going to have their own technique that's unique to their biomechanics. You might have some individuals that are able to squat and bench deadlift to a textbook standard. Then you might have certain guys that have a unique style to them, but it gets results in competition. There's even been, all-time world record holders that have very unique styles of squat and benching and deadlift. And so just because it doesn't fit the YouTube, example doesn't mean that you're squatting, benching, or deadlifting wrong.
When it comes to accommodating resistance, we had a lot of questions of, should I use bands? Should I use chains? Should we just do straight weight? From my experience, I love using bands because they really teach intent. I like using chains because they're very good at stability, especially for unracking and staying stable throughout, and then combining both of them. Yep. You get the best of the both worlds.
Yep.
But can you go into just say some of the advantages, disadvantages you've seen with using bands and chains, and what is the purpose of really accommodating resistance? Yeah,
so accommodating resistance is to lessen or increase the amount of weight placed or the force an athlete has to exert based on the joint angle. So when an athlete's at a disadvantageous joint angle, there's unloading that occurs, allows them to have an advantage at that particular disadvantageous joint angle. Then as the joint angle advantage is gained, more load is applied. With bands, we have overspeed eccentrics involved. The band increases the kinetic energy of an athlete as the athlete moves through the range of motion because of the active tension. We refer to it as an active tension. When you when you lift the barbell out of the rack, the bands are wanting to pull you down, right? Louis used to call it accelerated gravity. There's more benefit to using bands. Like you can, of course, become more explosive. More rate of force development will increase in my opinion, at a faster rate. However, it can be more fatiguing. And then, as we know, the bands can also kind of track you in a way to where athletes lose their ability to brace and feel stable under free weight because they're so used to being tracked by the band. So in that case, that's why we alternate the chain. Chain is just purely accommodating resistance. It doesn't have an overspeed eccentric aspect to it. But the trade-off in that is the benefit of increasing trunk stability and balance in the squat, bench, or the deadlift. I should say real quick, though, in the deadlift, we don't use chains as much because it's kind of difficult to get them set up correctly and they become a hassle. But in the bench and the squat, we will pretty much alternate between bands and chains wave to wave.
Yeah, and it's, I guess a lot of people, too, want this perfect linear program of changing in and out, but everything is made for a purpose. They're tools for a job. And you're right, there are some athletes who are very good at riding the groove of the bands, and they can keep them in perfect form, but our job is to find the exercise that give you the most carryover. Yep. And that's when you implement the change.
Yep. And I prefer bands myself. I only really throw chains in when I'm feeling fatigued from the bands. Something George Halbert told me a long time ago that I've always remembered is he said that, bands will give you the most amount of return on your investment, but they also can take the most from you if you're not in control of how often you're using, the frequency of use.
Kind of from that, it goes like the importance of coaches and the ability to evaluate sets.
Yeah.
We kind of touched on it on the start, but I think to kind of do a little bit of a deeper dive into that aspect.
Yeah, so like we said, you get a lot of first reps, and of course there's second and third reps if you're benching. But, I like to, if I'm evaluating an athlete, that dynamic effort day gives you a chance to see their first rep execution, for 8, 10, or 12 sets. And like I said, under those parameters, you got, a lighter intensity, so you can feel safe making technique adjustments and not worrying about, I'm not going to give a guy a technique adjustment when he's about to go for a top set max effort. The risk of injury increases, and, you don't want to create doubt. But in the dynamic effort training structure, that's a lot of opportunity for a coach to, establish good technique and then, really refine technique over time. You're never going to have perfect technique. The goal is to find, technique that fits the parameters of safety, then refine that over time.
It's all about being optimal.
Exactly.
And being a coach is crucial because execution matters. Coaches should never be viewed as the ones who just count reps.
Yeah.
When you're running, just say a squat, we're there to evaluate bar speed, technique breakdown, and seeing where you're breaking down fatigue-wise. Is there one muscle group getting tired before the others?
Yep.
Then, distill that analysis and then give feedback. And then if we're giving feedback, we're ensuring it is precise. It's not overcoached. It's not all the shit about cueing this, cueing that. It's the minimal effective cue to get the job done. And if there's something that is blatantly going to hurt them, we will jump in and stop. But if not, it's at the end of the workout, we'll talk to them and work on, okay, hey, here are steps we're going to do to fix this or improve that. Our goal is to ensure optimal training quality and athlete progression.
Yeah. And the thing about cues you said I want to say is, some people will diss our cues, the big air. And, I see people say that, Louis' arch cue is wrong because they think that he's, encouraging people to enter lumbar extension. Really, when he would say arch, all he's saying is really to push your upper back, mid back into the bar and resist any sort of chest collapsing. Louis always taught, correct trunk bracing. He always, understood stacking, having the shoulders in line with the hips and making sure the rib cage is braced down. We weren't ever, trying to lift in lumbar extension. So the cues, big air, the cues, chest up, the cue, arch, they all work. They've worked for many athletes at Westside. A lot of coaches, they'll come up with a new cue and it pretty much communicates the same thing that we were communicating with our cues. It's just that everybody likes to criticize Westside and everybody likes to come up with something new so they can have, some content based on a new cue.
It's context dependent. If you're at Westside, you knew exactly what was being said to you and why. There's no ambiguity with that cue. For maybe people visiting who weren't used to how Louis would cue and each training partner was basically a coach too.
100%.
Everyone had a purpose there. They're giving feedback to whoever is under the bar.
Yeah.
But it's highly context dependent. And if you're a coach, find your own cues, go for it. Find what works, but don't get stuck on them. It's your job as a coach is we've always been taught give the minimal effective dose of cues.
Yeah,
Because
and
it
in my
ruins the
opinion,
flow.
you want to get them to a point you don't even need cues, right?
For sure, because they're training themselves.
Yep.
And there's a time to be like where maybe a little bit of motivation is there, but we're not going to be cheerleaders either. We're all there for a purpose and a job, and our job is to make sure the athletes are getting the best possible training they can to progress in their sport.
Yeah, and you know, something funny at these meets, you'll hear guys, the coach wants to scream the cues, and sometimes they scream them so loud the coach becomes, they want their moment too, right? The coach don't want to be off camera not saying nothing. They got to yell so they can be part of the moment.
To each their own.
Yeah.
But it's
But don't diss our cues. They work. They work for us. Maybe they don't work for you. They work for us.
they've produced over 150 world record holders in the strongest powerlifting gym in the world.
True.
And transferred into high level athletics, MMA, best grapplers in the world, all based off the same simple cues. Because it's just like you go into someone else's gym, you don't know what their culture is, you don't know how their equipment works. Like even knowing if you're in a monolift, how much the hooks will sway if they don't sway, you know it intimately inside and out. So therefore you have cues based on your culture, your gym, your equipment. And that's the way it is. Like we're not here to criticize others, but at least be open-minded and analyze that. I wonder why they're saying that and what does it mean.
And something you said just a minute ago about training partners, you know, was the great thing about the powerlifting groups at Westside Barbell. You know, everybody's experienced. So, we didn't need a ton of cueing anyways. And then, you know, the second part is I didn't so much need a cue before I went. It's just after the set, the guys that I train with, I trust their word. They'll tell me, hey, man, you know, next set, try to get this right, get that right. I didn't even need the cue by the time I get to the barbell. I already am thinking what we talked about between sets and just going to adjust accordingly.
Too, you guys would train so hard that nearly the meets got in the way of the training.
You know, well, you know, everybody knows I don't compete too often. I always enjoyed lifting at Westside as much as I enjoyed going to a meet because, as anyone knows, I mean, we don't try to compete outside of the realms of safety to where we're killing ourselves every day. But every training day at that gym, whether it's dynamic effort, max effort, or even, you know, accessory work, you're trying to beat somebody.
To move into the proper lifting equipment to use on dynamic effort day and just in general, I think the core aspects is a belt, wraps, and shoes, maybe straps. But what comes to mind to you when you think of proper lifting equipment to have in the gym?
Well, the first things I think about was related to the box squats. So with box squats, we never want to wear knee wraps. We can wear knee sleeves. We generally don't. I don't recommend box squatting in heeled shoes, you know, any sort of an Ole shoe. We want flat shoes. I recommend Chuck Taylors. With the bench press, you know, if you like a belt, wear a belt. We always like to wear wrist wraps, just, you know, protect your joints. You could be a tough guy if you want to, but over time, I mean, I'm 37 years old now. You get older, you start feeling that shit. So if you have the availability of a belt, you know, wrist wraps, knee sleeves, you know, use them. There's times too, you know, you might get shoulder pain, some bicep tendonitis. I'll use sometimes deadlift straps for the speed deadlifts just to give my shoulders, my biceps a break, you know, because I'm going to grip and rip that bar on a speed day. So sometimes the straps work just to keep stress off the biceps and the shoulders. So, you know, use those things to your advantage. You know, a lot of times guys think, I like to train beltless sometimes, but I use it more as a tester. I don't use it to prove nothing because there's nothing to be proved, right? Who gives a shit what you can squat beltless anyways? You're not going to do it at competition. So never avoid using proper lifting equipment because you're trying to be a tough guy or prove something. Use the things like Louis always used to say, you're going to need that shit. The less you use it now, the more you're going to need it in the future. So you might as well just use it and not beat yourself up.
If it's not an advantage, it's a disadvantage.
Exactly.
So choose what the advantage is. And belts to me are the best feedback for bracing. They're phenomenal. They're phenomenal, like to cue how to push out against it. You get way more out of your exercises. It makes it safer with intra-abdominal pressure. But to wear a good quality belt. And today, our intern Cam was wearing those Nike Metcon shoes, and we're doing a sumo deadlift. And I was, Cam, I'm not sure if you can feel this, but you're basically doing a sumo off a 1.5 inch deficit because those soles are so thick. So he took off his shoes, his form instantaneously changed.
Exactly.
And that's the power of just having good flat sole shoes and knowing like the purpose of it. If you're moving around, if the shoes are so cushy, we've seen people come in here with like really expensive trainers that look great, but as soon as they start squatting, the stability or the lack of stability on the ankle and the feet starts happening, and it completely screws the workout up.
100%. It's gonna decrease the amount of force you can produce because you're coming from an unstable platform. And then real quick, something I want to say about the belt that you mentioned about the inter-abdominal pressure. You know, I don't know if there's any studies on it. I can't quote a study at this moment, but I can say over my experience, I feel like wearing a belt has helped me increase my trunk strength, you know, because it gives you something to press against. It's essentially when you're bracing against that belt, it's somewhat of an isometric trunk contraction, would it not be?
Yeah, and the trick is not to have it too tight or too loose. Like just
there you go.
Just right. If you
That's
have
a
it too
good mention.
tight, then you can't flex your belly out, and if it's too loose, it's going to do nothing for you. Our rule of thumb is when you put on the belt, you can just about squeeze your fingers in there because that's just enough to push against it.
Yep. You got to have something to breathe into. You got to have some room.
Yeah, and make sure too for deadlifting, if it's too tight, you can't get in position.
Yep.
So, and then you can go down the rabbit hole of different thicknesses of belts, depths of belts, etc. But if you just have a genuine, good all-round belt, it will serve you and last you a lifetime.
Yep. And if you're going to get a belt, a prong belt, get a single prong, double prongs. Every week someone gets the double prong at the gym and we got to try to get them out of it. Double prongs are traps.
Do you like single prong over lever?
Yeah, no, I prefer pronged belts because of the ability to adjust on the fly and also being a super heavyweight, the size of my gut can vary depending on the day. So, lever belts, like you said, if I'm deadlifting and I'm a little bloated that day, that lever belt, I'm going to have to get the multi-tool out and adjust it because I can't get to the bar. It's now a straight leg pull because I can't, set my hips down. My gut's too big that day. So I think if you're a bigger guy, it's, the single prong's probably the best bet. I think the single prong's the best bet for everybody, but I'm biased.
I love the convenience of the lever, especially for accessories going from sleds to maybe light work, but I just love the security of a single prong.
Yeah. That's the thing too to mention, right? Sometimes depending on what belt maker you've gotten, the latch can break. So, if you're squatting 1,000 pounds and the lever breaks, you're gonna be in some trouble.
Shout out to Steve Cordillo who makes our lever belts here that
great belts.
Have been tried and true, but it comes up with the single, the double, and the lever belts. And I think Louis hammered home into us single prong belts.
Yeah.
Because you're right, even in the gym, a visitor come in, they get stuck in the double prong, and we have to get the pliers out and try peel them out of it.
Yep.
Moving on to rest between sets, and let me share this screen. So, if we're going to talk about the recommended rest times between sets, and if we start with max effort, dynamic effort, and repeated effort method, these are just rules of thumb, but max effort is going to have your biggest amount of rest periods. And Burley, can you break down why that's important to have longer rest for max effort?
So we're looking for optimal ATP regeneration. We're also just looking to make sure that the athlete has the time to, relax from the last set, not relax in a total go to rest mode, relax mentally, reevaluate technique, make adjustments as needed. The 2-minute is generally on the way up, the warm-ups, usually as we get to the top sets, the last 2 warm-ups, you might have, 3 minutes between, and then usually that top set anywhere between 3 to 5 minutes. So, and it's always dependent on the athlete and the day. There's sometimes, we might be able to push the pace a little faster, and there's some days the athlete might need a little bit more rest. But the intent on max effort day is to lift the heaviest weight possible that day. So we're not so much worried about training density as we are about training intensity.
We get lots of questions in, and we had one who was an athlete whose coach was using 3-minute breaks.
Yeah. That was for dynamic effort.
For dynamic effort.
Yeah.
And they were doing 10 sets of 2. So that's 30 minutes of inactive time.
Yeah.
One, I don't know who has that amount of time to spend at training.
Yep.
But altering your rest between sets is a great way to increase conditioning.
100%. Low-hanging fruit.
For sure.
Easy.
And for our athletes, we started off with a 45 seconds to 1 minute to where now they're basically, when it's their turn up, it's less than 30 seconds.
Yep.
But they were able to build up that conditioning aspect from manipulating rest between sets.
Yep.
The same with max effort. Max effort, there is leniency to where 2 to 5 minutes. I would say 3 minutes on average because it goes by rotation usually. Mm-hmm. But it is something you can manipulate as a coach when it comes to your programming.
Yep.
And remember, it's strength and conditioning. And the rest, manipulating that affects the conditioning hugely.
And there's a caveat here with the rest period. So as we get dynamic effort, repeated effort, it's 45 seconds to a minute. That would be Westside Barbell gym standard. If you're someone that's new to dynamic effort, you might need to take a little bit more time, maybe even up to 2 minutes. My advice would be to take as much time as you feel you need to be able to execute the next sets and reps to standard. We don't want to see a big breakdown just because you're trying to push density because you're new to the methods. If you're new to these methods, maybe you got to go to 2 minutes between, but you shouldn't need 3 or 4 minutes. Even the beginner shouldn't need 3 or 4 minutes. 2 minutes really max, but just make sure you're setting yourself up for success each set.
So let's move on to discussing the benefits of the volume of max effort day.
Yeah, so the thing about the volume is that, dynamic effort training is the opportunity for us to accrue a ton of training volume. On a max effort day, the training volume of the main exercise is very limited. We try to make up for that as much as we can with the accessory exercises, but you can only do so much in a day. Dynamic effort training is where we really accumulate volume and meaningful volume. It's our main exercise work is performed between 70 and 85%. So those are training intensities that make a significant difference in the long run. And then on the first week you're stacking 24 reps at 75%, and that's a pretty good trade-off. It's obviously the focus of that day is rate of force development improvement. However, there is still a absolute strength development occurring as well, just not at the rate that would occur at max effort intensity.
For us, the volume of dynamic effort day is our worst kept secret for athletic performance. Mm. The amount of density and intensity and volume we can accrue in a dynamic effort day ranges from, on the low end, 150,000 to the extreme end of 400 to 500,000 pounds of volume. For our athletes, this is what develops their engine, develops their strength endurance, along with their speed strength. Dynamic effort just became like one of the most crucial parts for athletic development, and because of the volume. The amount of volume you get done, and we do a total body day compared to the standard splitting up between upper and lower, and we do that to give the athletes another opportunity for skill acquisition throughout the week.
Yep.
But understanding and calculating volume is huge. And when you reduce rest periods again, you can now get in more sets and reps, attributing to volume, and make sure everything is purposeful. You're not just doing exercise for the sake of doing exercises. They have to carry over. A big trick we use, if we want to increase total volume, we'll increase either trips on the sled or the weight on the sled. Sleds can add anywhere from 30,000 to 80,000 pounds of volume per workout right there. They're hugely important. But yeah, the volume on this day is huge.
Yeah. It's the day that we get the most volume accumulated in one day. It's also what I like about this is whether you're talking about athletes or powerlifters, it's a good day to judge an athlete's conditioning and fitness, right? If we see a guy that's struggling to get through the sets that he should be able to make, at the proper velocity, we know that either he's carrying excess fatigue, so we got to look at the training and maybe change something up, or we just know that they're lacking conditioning. We maybe need to increase the sled work, just the general, physical preparedness work, the conditioning work.
And again, back to the dynamic effort, you are training through fatigue.
Yeah.
You have purposeful set fatigue that you're training through, and it's going to increase that work capacity all around.
No, we've both seen it in the gym, right? You've seen guys that test at a certain level of max effort, and you assume that they can handle, the percentages that dictate they should be able to work with this weight for this many sets at this velocity, and then it doesn't correlate. And a lot of times, like I said, it's either fatigue or we know that they're just not fit enough. And how many times, you see guys that are new to the gym, those first few weeks, you're puking in the parking lot. And it's just because it's a different level of volume, a different level of velocity. It's just a different level of, go. Like we're going, we're moving.
And that brings up another good point is it'll teach you how to pace yourself too.
Yeah.
Like if you try run with the top, like you're going to have a very unhappy outcome, which is puking in the parking lot, which we don't condone puking. To me, it's your body rejecting exercise. But sometimes you have to get a few bumps along the way to understand what this day is. But it's it's huge. Like I can't stress enough the importance of volume, exercise selection, and manipulation. And that kind of brings us onto the selecting the main exercises for dynamic effort day. And if I bring up the screen, we've done a graph on that. If you can run through that for me, Burley. Yeah,
so this just shows how we might change up exercises over the course of, this is 6 total waves. So as you can see, we got the comp bar with bands, the SSB with chains, the giant camber bar with bands, and then we pretty much work right back through that with, just change the accommodating resistance up. Same principle applies to depth and the bench press. It's not rocket science. It's pretty simple. This would just be like a standard, starting rotation of exercise and barbell variations or combinations of specialty bars and accommodating resistance. However, really what we recommend is as you work with an athlete or you're, training yourself and you learn your needs and what you're weak at is, for instance, if I got an athlete that's dealing with an anterior chain weakness in the squat, and also maybe dealing with some posture issues in the squat, the SSB might be used. If I got an athlete that has weak hips and has issues with the chest collapse in the squat, maybe the giant camber bar gets used. So this is a standard rotation, but ultimately, as you get to know yourself or know your athlete, you can start to manipulate the rotation based on the athlete's needs.
And each wave represents 3 weeks within it.
Yep.
And then if you're looking at that, so this is 6 waves. So you have multiples to choose from. And a little change means a lot.
Yep.
And if you don't have a lot of equipment, that is completely fine. You can change stances, change box heights, change types of accommodating resistance. So with one bar, you can come up with 6 or 7 different ways to get different ways from it. So obviously, the more bars you have, the more selection you can choose from, but it doesn't have to be as huge as changing out the bar.
Yeah, I work with people all the time that just have standard gym setups. Really, all they have access to is a standard 45-pound power bar, and we still work through plenty of different, accommodating resistance and stance combinations, box height adjustments, like you said, a lot of different grip adjustments on the bench.
Yeah, because right there, that's 18 weeks.
Yep.
So it's just use your imagination and whatever equipment you have, just make little adjustments, and it makes a huge difference.
Yep.
All right. So then we went into the rotation of accommodating resistance. We rotate barbells. So the rotate accommodating resistance is just the same. You just pick a chain, pick a band, or pick both.
Yep.
Do you have any rhyme or reason when you bring one in for the other?
Like I said, I prefer to use bands because I think the overspeed eccentric effect can't be understated. It's going to give you more return on investment. You're going to get stronger and more explosive. Rate of force development will increase, in my opinion, faster. The only, like I said, the trade-off with that is that they can become more fatiguing, and they can also start to create aches and pains. Like there's been times where I'll get what almost feels like shin splints in your forearms because from using a lot of times excessive band on the pressing. But yeah, so I use chains when the bands are causing excess fatigue. I try to stay with bands as much as I can, but like you said, what we discussed earlier, there can be an issue with athletes losing the ability to feel stable under free weight. If you're an athlete like that, it might be good to just go one wave band, one wave chain. But if you're an athlete that doesn't have stability issues, I think use band as much as you can.
Also, using the regular squat bar, like that straight bar, can put a lot of stress on shoulder joints, especially if you're a big guy. So that's where the advantage of having a bow bar or camber bar comes in. So if you're noticing that after squats, your shoulders are tight or sore, there's a good chance it's carrying over from that squat bar. And then that's why you should look into investing into different rotations of bars, from safety squat bar, bow bar, camber, giant camber bar, etc.
Yeah, every specialty bar has a unique training effect, and it also has a lot of them take down or reduce the stress placed on the shoulders. So it's huge. SSB does that, bow bar does that, camber bar does that. So great bars to have in your arsenal if you can afford them or you have access to a gym that has them.
And if you try the homemade method of dropping a bar onto pins, best of luck. Some have tried it and it never works out that well.
No.
So the importance of a proper box squat technique, we have queued up a video Laura has done on this, and I think we will let her talk through it.
Yep.
When setting up for a box squat, finding an appropriate box height is important and should be something consistent in your training. It is common to use a 10 to 12 inch tall wooden box that is approximately 24 inch by 24 inch or larger. Using rubber mats to stack on the wooden box is ideal so that multiple training partners can work together in a session and adjust the box height easily. Your box height should be set to parallel where your hip crease is in line with the top of your knee. In a wide stance, root your feet into the ground to lock your hips in. Put pressure into the bar with your upper back and brace your abdominals and low back. Your whole body should be loaded up into the bar. Squeeze your glutes and hips to fully unrack the bar, keeping your upper back and head in place. Hinge your hips back and then start to spread the floor or push the floor apart as hard as possible. Do not roll onto the outsides of your feet. Keep your whole foot in contact with the floor and stay pushing into your feet through the whole rep, even when you are seated on the box. You want to have as much speed as possible while maintaining control of the eccentric portion, sitting softly to the box without plopping or hitting hard. Without losing tension in your abs and low back, release the hips and hamstrings into the box, then fire them as explosively as possible to reverse the motion. Do not rock back and forth to use momentum to come off the box. Hinge and keep your upper back in the starting plane, forcing yourself to use your posterior chain to reverse the motion off of the box. To ensure that you are sitting back far enough and that your stance is wide enough, but not too wide, look for a shin angle that is vertical from the side and from the front.
I would say the vast majority of videos and questions we get from people on doing box squats incorrectly is, one, is plopping on the box, and two, is trying to force a rock. So they think we're actually rocking rather than releasing the hips.
Yeah.
Those are the two aspects that a lot of people get wrong, and that's where that gives box squats a bad reputation.
Yep.
Because plopping on a box is definitely going to jar your back. You should always
100%.
keep tension going down.
Yep.
And thinking that we're rocking, especially I've seen people bring their feet up. I have no idea how they're balancing. They put them back down, and off they go.
Yeah.
What are some things you've seen with box squats but done incorrectly?
Well, like you said, the biggest thing is people crashing into the box. So it's important to, obviously, as Laura mentioned, you want to sit to the box as softly as possible. And the benefit to that is, deceleration. To have the ability to decelerate under, it's a centric force output is what it is. So that's obviously a good training aspect of the box squat. And then also when we're sitting on the box and then we're releasing the hips and, performing the concentric portion of the box squat, we're focused on achieving two things. We want static overcome by dynamic work and then relaxed overcome by dynamic work. And that's going to create a higher level of force generation. It's going to actually help you improve your rate of force development at a increased rate compared to just standard squatting. If you're gonna, you see some guys do the touch and go box technique. To me, that's useless. It essentially makes the box as a depth marker, and then it also, if you're training a little bit heavy, you could increase the chance that you do crash into the box improperly. And all you're achieving at that point is the static overcome by dynamic aspect of the box squat. And in my opinion, you'd be better off just doing a pause squat versus using the box in that capacity.
Yeah, our goal is to create an imperfect collision, so that the energy goes into the box that get dissipated. Yep. So you need to come back up. You need to recruit more.
Yep.
And it's a great way to judge depth because you can have the box at the height for the people you want. Mm-hmm. I will say, I'm not sure if it exists out there, but if anyone wants to make a box that has fast adjusting height, that would be amazing for big groups.
It doesn't wobble. Yeah, they all wobble, right?
That doesn't wobble. That doesn't have pins. It goes up and goes down. That's why the tried and trusted 2 and 1 inch mats is by far the fastest way we have.
Yeah.
But if that exists, let us know. It's stable. We've seen some things that are pretty janky, but that's the power of having those inch mats because you can, depending on the height of the person, add and subtract as need be. Moving on to the deadlift. I don't know who that guy is, but
yeah. And that's just the intent of this is just to show that we're moving fast, but we're still moving with technical proficiency. A lot of people will grab the bar and try to move as fast as possible, which is what we want to do. We have to do that within the realm of proper technique. So try to find that mix of solid technique and optimal barbell velocity.
And if we go like 2, if I can try to do a very crude way of starting you at the start here. But when you're more views coming. When you start that bar, pulling into it, getting a good base is huge. I've seen too many people who just grip and rip the bar.
Yeah.
And getting that, again, dynamic effort, it gives you an opportunity to do perfect execution, time over time. Yep. But pulling some of that slack out of the bar, putting that tension in, getting set in, and then you see you got a maximum acceleration through.
Yes.
If you can do double overhand, go for it. It's by far one of the most advantageous grips, but mixed grips completely fine.
Yeah.
And for some people too, a lot of our guys will use straps, especially for our grapplers. If they're going to have a grapple heavy day after training, that's when they'll bring in straps. Yep. But if you don't have to use them, don't.
No. And the danger of mixed grip is really having hinge in your elbow. As long as you can keep the elbows locked out and the arms straight, you're going to have no issue really with the mixed grip. If you get heavy enough, say if you're pulling in 850, 900, or 1,000, something crazy like that, any barbell grip can rip a bicep both distal or proximal. But for speed work, as long as you make sure the arms are hooks, we're not trying to bicep curl the bar off the ground. Use the arms as hooks. You should be good to go. But that's another important thing is that I'm loading my arms first and then sitting into the pool. Yeah. I'm not using my arms to move the bar. I'm using my legs.
I think a lot of people they don't see the minutia of what's happening. Like some of the best pullers, like they're loading themselves up before that bar comes out. Especially like how do you deal with slack in the bar, right? When you're pulling 800 plus, you're going to have like a moment where not all the plates come out the bar. Like, do you wedge yourself in when you're going for a max effort?
Well, so the technique varies depending on the lift, right? So for dynamic effort, I will actually pull the slack out of the bar because what I'm trying to do is get as braced as possible and pull that weight off the ground, I guess, as fast as possible, which is what I'm trying to do when I'm lifting heavy, but it's a little different technique. Yeah. So when I go to max effort, I don't pull slack out of the bar so much, and I always say I try to hit the bar as hard as I can. I try to almost pop it off the floor, if that makes sense. So I'm not pulling the slack off it when I'm going for a max effort. I'm almost trying to hit that bar so hard that it kind of creates oscillation, and then take advantage of that oscillation, almost like catch it as it bounces off the floor, and try to time that. Another thing I do that is I try to shorten the hamstring. So I'll sit into my pull a lot of times. I'll do one sit, two sit, third sit, breathe, and then pull. And I try to, there's no concentric portion of the deadlift, so you can't make kinetic energy, right? So what I try to do is I try to drop in and kind of use my body weight to create some sort of kinetic energy to try to get, some sort of advantage of stretch reflex off the ground. So I use a mix of, kind of performing, I don't know, some sort of a air squat mixed with, popping that bar as hard as I can off the ground, create that oscillation, just try to catch it and pull it up the legs. I know it sounds probably confusing to most people, but that's the way I think about it, the process I work through, and it works for me.
Yeah, and it's you'll have some lifters who will get that tension in the back of their hamstrings. They'll grab the bar, straighten out the hamstrings, then pull themselves back into position and pull.
Yeah.
2 is bracing, holding your breath.
Yep.
It's very hard to hold your breath when you're bent over grabbing the bar.
Yeah.
The breath should be taken when you're standing up fully, and then grab it down.
Yeah.
And if you can't hold your breath for that long, it means you're taking too long to set up, and you're overthinking it. But I see far too many people who try to take a breath as they're bent over. There's no way you can get a full breath of air and brace against that belt correctly. Yeah,
so we want to lengthen the hamstring, take the air, fill the trunk, then shorten the hamstring, pull.
Boom. And let's go over to one last video on the bench press.
Again, this is just to show standard bar speed. I mean, maybe we want to be a little faster than that. That was more of just a demonstration. But like I said, we're trying to move, maximum velocity. We're trying to move under control with proper technique. And that's the thing. If my bar speed's looking great, but my technique's looking like crap, we got to find that crossover to where everything is matching up, right? The bar speed matches the technique. So never, you want to go as fast as you can while remaining technically proficient. If you're going too fast and you lose your technique, that training will eventually catch up to you. Oftentimes within the second wave, you'll be trashed.
Especially when a lot of people lose upper back tightness, like that scapular retraction when you pull out the bar. Yep. And as they're blasting it up, they'll go loose and hyperextend the arm.
Flat back. And then, exactly. That's another thing to think about, man. Even though these are submaximal weights, they can still hurt you. So you go flat back and let that bar dump back in you and, perform a ballistic press, and all of a sudden you got a pec strain, or at worst, a pec tear.
So to keep hammering home the point, you have 24 reps of bench to practice this. Yep. Is my math right?
Bench would be 27.
27.
Squat first week would be 24. Yeah, it's 9x3. And that's something that's, we should mention, it's 9x3 throughout the whole 3-week wave.
Yeah, and you're changing your grips. You're starting with your weakest grip, moving to your strongest grip at the end. So it's going to be 3 sets of your weakest, 3 sets in between, or some might be out wide, and then 3 sets finishing off in your strongest grip.
Yep. And for beginners, I will say, though, if you're a beginner and you're not confident in a close grip or a wide grip, you can go for the first wave, one, standard competition grip. Then maybe the next wave you go close grip. But yeah, for us, if you're an experienced athlete, you're familiar with the methods, we like to go, we got 9 sets. That's 3 sets of close, 3 sets of wide, 3 sets of comp.
If we go into accessories that are common on dynamic effort lower, what are the ones that come to your mind?
Really the standards are going to be inverse curl, reverse hyper, belt squat walks, sled drags. We usually don't do too much extra as far as multi-joint work, strenuous work, because if you think about the dynamic effort lower is 2 main exercises. We're going to have, a considerable amount of squat volume, considerable amount of deadlift volume. So we don't need as much accessory volume during those days. So a lot of times, it's a squat, deadlift. Then we get something like, hypers, abs, sled, we're out the door. For upper, you obviously, the volume, we don't have 2 max effort. I mean, we don't have 2 main exercises, I should say. So we're gonna load the accessory volume up a little bit more. And really all that means is that the accessory volume of a max effort upper and a dynamic effort upper are going to be comparable.
Yeah, and there's a long list of exercises to rotate between. And it's just making sure that there's purpose behind them. Don't put in an exercise because it's hard for the sake of being hard. Everything has to have purpose. When we're setting out dynamic effort days for the athletes, we want to make sure that the way we lay it out, it's a terrible analogy, but it's like the worst compound interest ever. Every accessory exercise adds on top of it. So the workout gets harder and harder as you push through it. But it means we can use lighter weights to get the most from it. Because we understand they're going to get more fatigued. And by throwing in something like jumps or like sled works in the middle of the workout, completely disrupts the flow. But it forces you to work that work capacity and try problem solve as you're going. Because you'll see within the groups, when they're going from accessory exercise to exercise, they will start finding the ways of the most optimal path of how to get it done.
Yeah. And so, from a power perspective, what we'll do is we frame the accessory exercises. We usually, if we, multi-joints are involved, we're going to start with the multi-joint. Really what we're going to do is the highest amount of energy demand will be performed first, and then, we'll perform exercises based on their demand. But yeah, no, it's similar. And then something I want to say about exercise selection in terms of accessory exercises. People think when they hear about our training, they think we're totally concerned with weak point training, and we are concerned with weak point training, but we don't become so consumed with it that we let it dominate our accessory selection. So oftentimes our selection of accessory exercises is going to be a standard rotation of exercise with maybe one or two exercises based on a particular weakness. But we don't want to just bias our accessory exercise selections all towards one weakness, because then we're ultimately detraining other muscle groups and causing new weaknesses. So, a standard rotation of your basic accessory movements mixed in with maybe one or two movements selected based on current weaknesses.
For simplification, the way I attribute, I have an A group, a B group, a C group of exercises.
Yeah.
And that way I'll rotate between them all depending on what is necessary. And usually I have a bunch of exercises that I know is going to carry over. So if we know we got competitions coming up, I'll start pulling within from a lot more from that A group than I will from B and C. But throughout the year, I'll try spread everything in.
Yep.
And how do I allocate that? It's just based on feedback from our athletes. What's carrying over, what's not carrying over. And sometimes something that doesn't give high return, we haven't done it in 1 or 2 years, we'll bring it back in, and lo and behold, it's a great stimulus now because we haven't done it. So,
like we've talked before about like the exercise matrix of an athlete. Every athlete has a grouping of mains and accessory exercise that's going to give them the highest return on their time invested. So it ultimately start with standard selections, but as you mentioned, you work with certain athletes, you start to know what they respond best to, what maybe they don't respond to, and then you start to manipulate the exercise selection accordingly. And
if you have that one exercise you don't want to do, more than likely that's the one you should be doing.
Yeah. Another thing too is correlation, right? I can sometimes maybe PR on a dumbbell bench press, and I can start to think, okay, we might have a PR coming up on the bench press because I just the 150s just went up for 5 extra reps than they were back when I was benching 550. So now maybe I can think, hey, maybe 575's on the horizon. The bench press is moving. Other things like down sets with close grip. All of a sudden you start to go up 25 pounds on your down sets. You can start to correlate that with maybe a close grip bench PR coming up in the future. So you can use your accessory exercise as predictors for future PRs.
And the way I do accessory exercises is from week 1 to week 2, we're increasing percentage.
Yeah.
And then from week 2 to week 3, we'll increase percentage further. So we're always progressing up in weight. But there's another option is you can add either another set or more reps. Like there's variance to that, like from the athlete perspective, because we're trying to get more intensity into it.
Yeah.
But a lot of questions we get in, do we keep with the same weight throughout? I'm like, no, there's an adjustment somewhere in the accessory exercises every week. What about from your aspect?
My suggestion is always, and this obviously depends on the honesty and the work ethic of the athlete, but I always say use the heaviest weight you possibly can while remaining capable of performing all sets and reps to strict standard. Because after the main exercise, you can't always predict the level of fatigue that an athlete's going to carry away from the main exercise. So it does become difficult, unless you work with an athlete directly in the gym, it can be difficult to prescribe specific training weights to accessory exercises. So just to make sure your training intensity is on point, oftentimes just training with the heaviest weight you can while meeting all sets, reps, and technique parameters is a good approach. But like your approach is because we work with the guys in the gym, so you know how to make those modifications. I guess I'm talking more if I'm working with someone online or someone not in person. That's the directive I usually give.
I will say that is hard when you're trying to give somewhat of a generalization to coaches or to people online. But when you have someone in-house, context is key. You know them well enough to we got to change this up.
Yep.
And we had coaches visiting, and we're doing dumbbell floor press as a accessory work, and without thinking went over like, hey, we're not doing this. We're going to go up 20 pounds to 75. And they're like, well, how did you know that? I'm like, did you not see how fast they're moving 50s?
Exactly.
So just
Yeah.
because the percentage says it's this, doesn't mean like you have to stay there. Like it's moving too fast. We have to up the weight.
Yep.
Another thing that people get confused on is max effort accessory volume versus dynamic effort accessory volume. Can we go into like just going the differences between those?
Yeah, so max effort accessory volume is always going to be a bit more because we have to drive the volume of the training day through the accessory exercise, considering that the main exercise, it's not very volume dense. So typically going to be more accessory exercise selections on the max effort days, particularly on the lower day. Like I said, max effort upper and dynamic effort upper, the accessory exercise volume will be somewhat comparable, but there is a discrepancy between max effort lower and dynamic effort lower. Considering that we have two main exercise and dynamic effort lower, we want to make sure that we're not overtraining I shouldn't even say overtraining, but overdoing it on the accessory exercise selections with dynamic effort lower. And there's going to be times that you might think, well, hell, I got no problem doing a full battery of accessories today. I feel great. Well, you might not feel great next week. So sometimes it's important just to keep a governor on things to some extent to make sure you're managing fatigue appropriately and not running yourself into any walls. We're trying to improve performance. We're not trying to prove how hard we can train.
And people get confused from when we say on dynamic effort with the accessories, it's maximal intent.
Yeah.
But the intensity of dynamic effort day is moderate.
Yeah.
On max effort day, the intensity is high. So
Yeah.
on your accessories, your intensity is high.
Yep.
And even though there's going to be maximal intent involved, there's a very different stimulus happening on max effort day compared to dynamic effort day.
Yeah.
The rest periods to a max effort day are going to be greater because you're lifting at a higher intensity, and by product, you're lifting a heavier weight.
Yeah. So like people think that max effort is the difficult day. Really, that's a walk in the park. The fatigue that you're going to feel after you performing your main exercise on a dynamic effort training day, particularly dynamic effort lower, you're going to be pretty tired. So to sit there and think that, you can go through a standard amount of accessory work, meaning, 4 to 5 accessory exercises, not going to happen. You want to stay between, anywhere between 2 to 3. And you don't want them to be overly intense. And oftentimes, like I said before, it's just abs, it's hypers, it's sleds, and we're out the door. And if we, I've seen guys before that want to push the envelope on the training volume, really push the accessory exercise volume on their dynamic effort days. And then ultimately by the next wave, week 2, those guys are burning out and tired and their velocity's, crap. And then they're, not having to deload, but they're going to have to start training with lighter weights for maybe a week or 2 to catch back up and be able to meet the velocity parameters again.
And that's a good differentiation between working with the athletes and working with powerlifters. Again, the way it's been used is completely different.
Yeah.
And the end objective is different in terms of they have to go out for their sport. So for us, like our volume is huge on dynamic effort day. But because we're using it, we combine both upper and lower, which again is going to add more volume. But there's no person who should be finished dynamic effort be sitting bright-eyed and bushy-tailed after it. Like you should have felt like this, we trained. We didn't just come for a workout. This was one hard training session. Mm-hmm. And normally it takes, if you're a high-level athlete, 3 weeks to adapt into it. For some, it takes 3 months.
Yeah.
But you can manipulate dynamic effort into whatever your sport is. That's the beauty of it. Is we can adapt it for our athletes the way you guys adapt it for powerlifting, to where you adjust whatever the weights, sets, and reps are.
Well, like you said, with the athletes, you want to obviously really focus on the conditioning and the density aspect of it. With the powerlifters, when you think about wear and tear, if you've got a 1,000-pound squatter, 75%, 75, that's 750 total weight between the bar weight and the counter resistance, for 12 sets of 2. So it's a different level of wear and tear for a strength athlete versus, a conventional sports athlete, because the training weights are going to be much different.
And that's where tracking volume is key.
Yeah.
If you're a 1,000-pound squatter, well, then your 50% is going to be way different than someone who's 405. But total training volume, everything catches up towards the end. And it's pretty interesting to see the total training volume and dynamic effort for a high-level powerlifter, for a high-level grappler.
Well, like Louis used to say, too, about the powerlifting aspect, the percentages assure that the athlete is accruing the proper amount of volume for the current level of absolute strength. So that's another reason, going back earlier to where we talked about RP and percentages, which one's more advantageous. The percentages, if you're found in percentages and able to meet those percentages every week, you can rest assured that you're accruing at the proper amount of volume for your strength level.
When it comes to putting jumps in dynamic effort day, do you put them in before or after main exercise?
Oh, it depend on the athlete's preference. Sometimes athletes jump better, after the deadlift and the squat. I mean, the squat and the deadlift. Sometimes better before, but your early preference. How about with the athletes? How about you? What do you go with?
It depends, right? Back to context.
Yeah.
If we want to do something through fatigue, I like to put in jumps after the main exercises, somewhere within the middle of the workout.
Yeah.
So then they have to do something that's taxing to the brain to like, okay, I have to jump onto this box. So you're like basically jumping through fatigue. If we're trying to get more out of the jumps, then it'll be straight after the main exercise or before.
Yeah.
More likely
It
before.
really, so you're looking at it from like one aspect of conditioning or one aspect pure plyometric.
Yeah,
Adjust accordingly.
If it's going to be pure plyometric, we do it on a separate day.
That's
Plyometrics are super important.
Yep.
And we want to have correct sets, reps, and rest. Mm-hmm. So for our plyometrics, we do them on a completely separate day. But if we're putting jumps in, like we have depth jumps in this round of our 3-week wave for dynamic effort, and we put that in, one, it's easy to execute. It's pretty taxing. But we want to get them to jump to do stuff through fatigue because it helps with the conditioning aspect.
Well, and these are guys that are, going to fights that can last upwards of 25 minutes. They got to be ready for any and all sorts of dynamic movements and situations, right?
Yeah. As we come towards the end, some of the troubleshooting. What do you do when the barbell moves too slow?
Lower the training weight. Lower the percentages. Generally, the adjustment we would do is, you're going to take 5% off of each training percentage of each week of the wave. And then sometimes that might have to be sustained for 2 waves in a row. But it's always more important to be able to meet the velocity parameter than it is to, lift the training weight that corresponds to your current level of strength. And that's both because you want higher level of training quality, meaning you're going to get better improvement of rate of force development because you're training dynamic effort properly. And it's going to ensure that you don't end up with a fatigue management issue because you're training too heavy on your dynamic effort work.
I will bring up something too when the bar is moving too slow. We get questions in that week 1 is fine, week 2 is slow, and then week 3 is they can barely move it. Mm-hmm. Make sure you're using up-to-date PRs.
Yeah.
That it's not off a PR that's 2 years old. Yeah. Because some of us would love to lift some of the weights we used to back then, but it has to be off a fresh PR. Yeah. Because then it's not correct percentages.
Yeah, there's no room for any Uncle Ricos on dynamic effort day. No. You know what I mean?
And like for our athletes, we're retesting records every 9 to 12 weeks. Mm-hmm. But it should be off a current one, not off one that is a couple of years old.
100%.
Then another question is, what happens if it's too fast?
Well, I would never recommend increasing the training weights. What I would recommend is like, say, if you're, way fast on your SSB squats, well, I would suggest you after this wave, maybe that 4th week, test that on max effort and just get a new max because there's a good chance you're set for PR. So if anything, it's a good thing. It's going to be probably indicative of a squat PR with whatever barbell you're using. But I don't think it's ever a problem unless you're moving like, if you're moving like 1.2 meters per second, maybe that's a little too fast, maybe a little too light, throw some weight on accordingly. But I mean, if you're carrying a 1 meter per second average, that's no problem. And
the other things to check is that maybe it's time to get new bands.
There you go.
If you're using bands, like they might be well broke in.
Might I suggest the Westside Pro bands that have no issues with that? And that's not a sales pitch, folks. I've been using these bands for a year. They're great.
Yeah, once they break in, they stay constant tension and they self-center themselves. Yep. A shameless plug for our bands.
They work.
Yeah. And then the other thing is calculating the volume. Sometimes people get confused between bar weight and band weight, and they'll combine both of them. So they might have a very light bar weight but correct band weight. So just make sure you're doing 50, 55, and 60% of your bar weight, which is the barbell plus the weights, and then 25% of accommodating resistance. And that's measured at the top. And it's then it's both bands. It's not one band versus the other band. Bands are just like plates. It's just make sure your math is correct because sometimes that can throw people off. Yeah,
the fish and game scale or a luggage scale to make sure that you got matching tensions. Definitely.
When to reduce training percentages for beginners or fatigued athletes?
Any time that you notice fatigue being present, so that's going to be an athlete struggling to either complete all sets and reps with proper technique, and obviously it's going to accompany that. It's going to be a decrease in bar velocity. So And then for beginners, oftentimes, even if they, everything's looking good in the max effort, they might not have the fitness and the conditioning to, perform 12 sets of 2 at 75%. That's where we're going to drop that training percentage down 5%. And then even with beginners, we can go as far as 10% reduction. I'll reduce it to the point. My suggestion would be to reduce to the point that the velocity moves within the realms of that's acceptable. The velocity dictates the training weight. The max effort is a suggestion, but the velocity ultimately dictates what the training weight needs to be.
And for beginners or fatigued athletes, manipulating that rest period can be huge. Yeah. Sometimes a difference of 30 seconds to a minute, that extra 30 seconds can make all the difference in speed, especially for beginner athletes here.
Yep.
And it normally takes, I said, people here 3 weeks to 3 months to be able to get up to the level of everyone else. But just manipulating the rest alone can allow you to keep the same bar weight and band tension.
Yeah. Work at your pace. Nobody walks in the gym. You're not going to be Chuck Vogelpohl off the bat. You got to have many years to get to that kind of level.
And then you still won't be Chuck Vogelpohl.
And you still won't be. Yeah, you're still not going to be Chuck Vogelpohl. We got one guy that's close, Jake Anderson. But yeah, there's only one Chuck, right?
Can we go over how excessive band tension can wreak havoc on your joints?
Oh yeah, it'll kill you. You'll feel it pretty quick too if you're using too much band tension. You feel it in your ankles, you feel it in your knees if you're squatting and deadlifts, and you'll feel it in your elbows, you feel it in your shoulders and your forearms if you're benching. And sometimes, if we're dealing with beginners that are new to accountable resistance, 25% accountable resistance, especially in the bands, can be a bit of a shock. So sometimes you can go as low as 15% if need be, and then we just make up the difference on the bar weight. The 25% is preferable because that's going to give us, especially with the bands, that's going to give us the overspeed eccentric effect we're looking for. But yeah, if you're someone that's noticing, even if you're an experienced athlete and you're getting beat up by the bands, we're either going to change out to chains or we can reduce the common resistance percentage, 5 to 10%, and then just kick the weight back to the bar.
Another thing too is to look at as a band placement. If your bands are too far forward on a rack or too far back, it's going to put you in a whole different groove and put a lot of stress where it shouldn't.
Yeah.
Especially if you're doing a box squat where you unrack the bar and go down to the box, it should be in a straight line.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be too far. Remember in the old red monolift back in 497, there was bands at the front and there was bands towards the middle.
Yeah.
And it's like, it depended on who was squatting, they knew which bands to get. So just make sure the bands are set up custom for you. That when you unrack them, it's going to keep you in that groove. Because a lot of times they're too far forward or too far back, and it's pulling you out of position, giving you undue strain. Yeah,
setup's crucial. And there is a video on our YouTube of Louis. If you go into Westside, and I think if you just YouTube band setup, Louis discusses how to attach them to the monolift. And then something real quick I also want to say while we're talking about setups is with chains. When we're training with chains, sometimes you see folks that have half the chain length laying on the ground. So when we're talking about chain weight, we weigh a chain, we're weighing the entire chain, right? So to ensure that chain weight's applied to the barbell properly, at lockout, we're looking for only really, 1 to 2, maybe 3 links at most touching the ground. So, if you're training with a certain chain weight and you weighed that chain, you need to be having most of that chain off the ground when you're at full lockout for that accommodative resistance to be properly applied.
And if you're the tallest guy in the group, good luck. Because
that's another thing too, man, is like how we form training groups at the gym. Oftentimes it was based on height, so you didn't have to do those extreme adjustments. So sometimes, or if I trained with a guy that's shorter than me and we only, there's 2 people in the group, you go first, I'll let you run through yours, I'll go after, because, adjusting the chains is a total hassle.
Yeah, because if you're going against someone who's 5'4" and you're 6'4", you got all the chains off the ground, and then they'll have the perfect links in between.
I remember one time Louis was actually fucking with me, and he had somebody training with me, and I was at full chain length, and they were at half chain length. And Louis was bitching at me because they're squatting faster than me. And I said that, they're at half chain length. And he goes, I don't give a fuck. And I'm thinking, man, this guy's going to kill me today.
It's the same with band tension. When you had someone like Chris Spiegel, who's nearly 7 foot, band tension.
Yeah. His wingspan's incredible.
And I just say squatting with someone like Coker, like different height-wise, but to Lou, band tension is the same. It just is what it is. So you got to treat it that way.
Well, he understood the difference, but he didn't give a shit. He looked at it like, if it's tougher for you, good. You should be able to handle it. You're supposed to be, you're good enough to be here. You should be able to handle it.
Awesome, Burley. Well, that wraps up this podcast. Any questions you have on it, just send them over our way. It's been a pleasure. And until next time, see you.